Happy Mother's Day, Village family. I am so glad to be back with you. And more importantly, I am glad that the OGs of the OT are back. And today we're going to be taking things in a bit of a new direction. Up to now, we've looked at many of the patriarchs of Israel, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for good reason, the very valid OGs. They were the literal fathers of Israel, and it was through them that Israel came to be the nation that they are. It was through them that faith in Yahweh was passed down from generation to generation. But as I said, we're going to go in a bit of a different direction today, and fast forward about 600 years after Abraham, and we're going to be looking at the story of the incredible, exciting character of a Rahab. She might not be who comes to mind when we think about OG Old Testament characters, but she really is so incredibly significant, not only to the story that takes place in her context and to the people that were impacted by her great act of faith, which we'll get into, but she's so significant and important to the overall story and the narrative of Israel and of God's ultimate plan for the world. She's unique and a bit exciting, a bit of a baddie, as my 14-year-old daughter would say. So today we're going to give Rahab her flowers and place her up there with these other OGs. So first of all, who is Rahab? We don't really know much. We get a small snapshot of her life in Joshua chapter 2. And when we meet her, again, this is about 600 years after Abraham and about 70 years after Israel has left Egypt. Moses is gone at this point, and Joshua is the leader of Israel. Israel is about to, or just wrapping up, 40 years of wandering in the desert. And Joshua is about to lead them into taking the land, their promised land, which is the land of Canaan. So this story is set just before the very famous Battle of Jericho. And this is where we meet Rahab. She is an inhabitant of Jericho, and her home is actually within the walls of Jericho. Yes, those walls, the walls that came tumbling down. And so here we go. This is what we're told of her right off the bat. This is Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. So here's our introduction to Rahab. And when we are given this information about Rahab and her occupation, it is presented to us without further comment, right? At this point, it is simply fact and nothing more. And what I mean by that is that there's no moralizing that goes along with this information. There's no further comment on, what an awful sinner she is, or how she couldn't be farther from the picture of a good Hebrew woman. There's none of that. It's just information that we are given, period. And in fact, it's more likely that for Rahab and for the rest of her community, her occupation would have actually been a valid one for her time, in her setting, in her city. It wouldn't have been regarded as something vile or degrading. It was simply a role to be fulfilled in society, and this was her role, this was her job. It just was what it was. Now, later on in the New Testament, we get a couple more references to Rahab, and those references are not necessarily without comment. And instead, she has this, what I think is a bit of an unfortunate title attached to her, Rahab the Harlot. And we'll get back to that a bit later. But again, at this point in the story, when we meet her, there's no indication at all as to whether Rahab was looking to escape her life or her position in the community. There's no indication that, she was eager to turn from her wicked ways. Because again, at this time, this was all she knew. This is all that she would have known. Nobody would have told her any differently. So this is how she's introduced to us here in the book of Joshua. So Joshua has sent 2 spies to go and scout out Jericho in preparation for this siege of Jericho. We don't know the details of this plan. We only know that there were 2 men sent to go look over the land to scout out Jericho. And in the very next verse, they end up in Rahab the prostitute's house. Again, no further commentary, just information being given to us. We don't know anything else. Was this part of the plan all along? I don't know, but I can say that if this was the plan, it was a bad one. And if these 2 men were supposed to be, the best secret spies that Joshua had, they were not very good at their jobs. They were very bad at it, because immediately, the very next verse tells us that they were immediately found out and reported to the king of Jericho as being at Rahab's. But as the story goes, Rahab, our baddie Rahab, she saves them. She hides them on her roof, and she sends the king's men off in a different direction, kind of on a wild goose chase, and she helps the spies escape out her window, which again built into the wall of Jericho, and they find safety and go back to their camps. But not before she has this interaction with them and says some what I think are very profound, and I would even say prophetic words to them. This is what she says. She says, "I know the Lord has given you this land. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror, for we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord, your God, is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below." I don't know if you remember, a few weeks ago, we talked about how some of these early stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and in those stories, we're witnessing a shifting of how these people, and people at that time, came to understand who God was, and came to understand who Yahweh was. And it was this shifting of viewing God, their God, as Yahweh, who is above other gods. Yahweh is the God of the cosmos, and the God of the nations, and the God of the households. He is all-encompassing God over all of it. And this here in this story, this is Rahab acknowledging the same, acknowledging Yahweh, God over all, the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. And she even makes this incredible faith statement: "I know the Lord your God has given you this land." Rahab is already a woman of incredible faith. Now, I don't know if there is such a thing as a prophetic allusion, but there is one in this statement that she's made. When Rahab has referenced the parting of the Red Sea, which again was an event that had taken place about 70 years beforehand. We need to pay attention to this. Why is she mentioning that? Why has this been specifically recorded? We need to pay attention to God speaking through this Canaanite woman, Pay attention to how God is bridging what was, the parting of the Red Sea, and what is to come, which we'll see in a few more verses. God intentionally mentions this, intentionally brings Rahab into this story of bridging what was and what will be to come. Through this Canaanite prostitute, Rahab, we see this happening. Because if you skip ahead through a few chapters, after the spies have gone back to Jericho and they join back with the Israelite army, they're going to come back to take the city. And in order to get back to Jericho, they have to cross the Jordan River to get there. And God performs another Red Sea miracle for them. And he parts the water so that they can cross through on dry land. Pay attention to the words of that Canaanite woman who made specific reference to the parting of the Red Sea. And then Rahab also made this oath with the spies. So before she sent them on their way, after she had made this declaration and acknowledgement of their God, she says this, "Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I've helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety," the men agreed. "If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land." In the NIV, it says, "Our lives for your lives." And then what they do is they give her the scarlet rope and they tell her to hang it from her window, again, her window on the wall of Jericho. And that she should make sure that when they come back, she's got all her family gathered there in her home with this scarlet rope hanging out the window. And this will signify to them that this home, this household, is to be spared and saved. And that's exactly what happens. Israel conquers Jericho, but Rahab and all of her family are saved. And they actually go and live among the Israelites after this. And I don't know if you caught that. Another very specific reference to an event in Israel's history, and an event that is pretty much central to Israel's identity. That scarlet rope on the window to signify this home should be spared. That should remind us of the Passover event, right? When the Israels were told to take the blood of the lamb and put it on their door frame so that the firstborn sons of Israel households would be spared as death passed through Egypt. Their homes were literally covered in the blood and lives were spared because of that. Again, it's not a coincidence or an accident that this story and the scarlet cord should remind us of that, or should allude to that. As we've been talking about these OGs of the OT, again, most of them so far have been the early patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. This is the beginning of Israel's story, so it's right. It makes sense that we would talk about them. Abraham and his descendants, again, this is the story of how Israel came to be. These men were chosen by God to bless the nations and bless the world, pass their faith down to the next generation. And that's how Israel came to be, by generations of faith following Yahweh. But here is Rahab, an outsider by all accounts, a woman, a prostitute who risked her own life in deceiving her king because of what she had heard about Israel and Israel's God. Can we understand how significant and how brave and courageous a woman Rahab truly is? And these references to the most central events in Israel's history. These are references to the parting of the Red Sea, this allusion to the Passover. The fact that these references are mixed up in Rahab's story, this Canaanite woman who does what for a living? There should be some little alarms going off in our heads at this point when we're reading this story. This little flag saying, pay attention, pay attention. There's something happening here. God is speaking through this Canaanite woman. Because in Rahab's story, we see this very brief, but very beautiful glimpse of the end goal, of God's end game, we'll call it. That God's kingdom is for everyone. We see this shining moment that the boundaries of who we think should be included might not be as strict as we think. That those boundaries might actually crumble like the walls of Jericho. And now remember, God is moving his story along in his time. So yes, this is only a brief flash, a glimpse of what is to come later. But again, it's so significant. I think that even Joshua himself at this point in Israel's history couldn't see that. He wouldn't know, he wouldn't grasp what that full endgame could look like. I think he very much still had the mindset of us versus them. And it's understandable because that's how the world worked at the time. That's how civilizations and nations survived. It was a civilization of conquest. It's me or you, it's us or them. It's also why, this is just an aside, but also why we don't see a lot of female characters in the biblical narrative, especially in the Old Testament. Again, because the biblical authors were, yes, they were inspired by God, they were led by God to write, but they were also doing that out of their own context and understanding and a frame of reference. And at the time, patriarchy was the frame of reference. So it doesn't mean that women were not and are not relevant and essential to the story. It just means that the writers didn't necessarily know to include them. Okay, that was an aside. Back to Jericho. Right before Joshua leads Israel in the very famous Battle of Jericho, just as they are approaching the city, Joshua looks up and he sees a man standing in front of him holding a sword in his hand. And he asks the man, "Are you for us or against us?" And if you remember the story, the man says, "Neither. I am a commander of the army of the Lord." Joshua was only thinking, it's us or them. Are you for us? Are you against us? But here is the messenger of Yahweh saying, that's the wrong question. It's not us or them. There is only God's will and God's plan and God's kingdom. And I love this picture of Joshua having this divine interaction. And there's Jericho in the distance. And there's Rahab's window in the distance with the red cord hanging down. With this incredibly significant, it's small, but it's a significant sign to us, again, that there is no our side and your side. There is no us versus them. This is a sign that God's kingdom is her kingdom too. God's kingdom is Rahab's kingdom. I said earlier that we would come back and briefly look at the references to Rahab in the New Testament. And there are only a few, very brief, quick references, but significant, again, given the context that Rahab would even be mentioned at all. So she's mentioned in Hebrews 11, she's mentioned in James 2, and the reason she's referenced is because they're talking about her incredible faith and her act of faith and what she did for those two spies in saving them. And in both of those references, she's referred to as Rahab the prostitute. And I gotta be honest with you, that bothers me. It bothers me that we refer to her as this, that history refers to her as this. What was originally introduced to us in Joshua 2 as a fact, her occupation, now, centuries later, we have somehow moved to this being her title. It's synonymous with Rahab. And in some translations and growing up, I always heard her referred to as Rahab the harlot. That's not a nicer word. It bothers me. I don't like it. I don't understand why she has to be identified this way. I feel offended for her. I feel like I want to protect her and kind of clean up her reputation for her. Like she doesn't deserve to be recorded in history this way. But the thing about the kingdom of God is that we bring all of our story. We bring all of it with us, don't we? All are welcome. We come as we are. We bring all of it. There's no edited version of our lives. Yes, we leave behind the shame and the condemnation, but we bring our story. All of it. The mess, the ugliness, the brokenness, it's all of our story. And it doesn't get edited out when we enter into God's kingdom. There's one more verse in the New Testament where Rahab is mentioned, and it's Matthew chapter 1. Bear with me here. This is what it says. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of King David. I love Matthew for this. He is writing a very thorough genealogy. A genealogy which, again, patriarchal society means that we trace the genealogy through the man, through the seed. But Matthew, he makes very purposeful mention of two women, Ruth and Rahab. Our Rahab. This is her. This is that Rahab. She left Jericho. She was rescued from Jericho and she went to live with the Israelites. She married Solomon. She had a child named Boaz. And you can read about Boaz in the book of Ruth. Ruth is an OG in her own right. And Ruth is the daughter-in-law of our baddie Rahab. Which means that Rahab is the great-great-grandmother of King David. And not only that, but whose genealogy is this? Why is Matthew writing this genealogy? Of course, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Rahab, the harlot, is Rahab a mother of Jesus? And the one does not cancel the other out. This is her story, all of it. Doesn't God write the best stories for our lives? He does. He does. I came across this Brennan Manning quote. I wanted to share it. It says, in a futile attempt to erase our past, we deprive the community of our healing gift. If we conceal our wounds out of fear and shame, our inner darkness can neither be illuminated nor become a light for others. Our lives matter. Our stories matter. Because our lives and our stories can prepare the way for Jesus. Can prepare the way for Jesus for somebody else. And God will take all of our story. He makes beautiful things out of our lives, from our mess, our brokenness, our hopelessness. You know, whatever titles the world wants to throw at us, it's okay. It's part of our story. But it's all made beautiful in the kingdom of God. He makes beautiful things out of our lives. From the mess and the brokenness, the hopelessness, the Messiah descended. The Messiah came. So I hope that you are encouraged and blessed today to know that every little bit of your story has significance, and God is writing the most beautiful story of your life. He's not editing out the mess or the pain or the brokenness, but he will, and he is making something beautiful. And I hope you will be surprised by that. So God, I thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness to us. I pray that you would bless those of us who are weary or broken or tired. Help us to leave behind the shame and the condemnation, but just to keep our eyes on you. You who gives comfort to the hurting. You who gives strength to the weary. You who makes beautiful things out of the dust. Bless us all, I pray. In your mighty name, amen.